watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's take a look at today's top stories. Violence erupts in Mexico after drug lord El Mencho killed after U.S.-backed operation. The next round of U.S. and Iran talks is scheduled for Thursday in Geneva. And EU foreign ministers meet in Brussels as Hungary blocks Ukraine loan. Highways across several states in Mexico have been blocked and cars set ablaze. It's after a major military operation killed the country's most wanted cartel leader, El Mencho, on Sunday. Flights to parts of the country have been suspended and residents are being urged to stay indoors. Here is more.
Mexico has been gripped by violence following the killing of one of the country's most powerful drug lords, Nemesio Oseguera, better known as El Mencho, during a military operation in the western state of Jalisco on Sunday. The Defense Ministry says a shootout left Oseguera seriously injured. Officials say he later died while being airlifted to Mexico City. The Mexican embassy in Washington said U.S. intelligence assistance supported the operation. The raid sparked an immediate wave of retaliation across several states. Burning vehicles, road blockades and arson attacks by armed groups were reported in Jalisco, Michoacán, Guanajuato and Oaxaca.
We experienced critical hours in which incidents were addressed in different parts of the state and the metropolitan area. Coordination between various agencies at all levels of government was key. The main objective on this day has been to safeguard the safety of the people. Therefore, early this morning, from this security meeting, which is in permanent session, we activated Code Red, which remains in effect.
Gunmen used torched cars to block highways in an apparent attempt to disrupt security operations. Residents described scenes of fear and uncertainty as the unrest unfolded.
Look, now we're scared. We only go out when it's necessary because people don't know whether to go out or what to do. It's good that they're finishing with these organizations, but there's fear because of what is happening now. You don't know how to react.
The U.S. Embassy in Mexico urged American citizens in affected areas to shelter in place and limit movement, citing security concerns. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum sought to reassure the public, saying there was absolute coordination between federal and state authorities and urged people to remain calm. Oseguera's death marks a significant blow to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of Mexico's most powerful criminal organizations and a major player in cocaine and fentanyl trafficking into the United States. However, security analysts warn that the removal of such a high-profile cartel leader can trigger violent power struggles, raising concerns that further instability may follow.
Diplomatic efforts between Washington and Tehran are back on the table with new negotiations scheduled in Geneva later this week. But while both sides signal movement, sharp disagreements remain.
A third round of talks between the United States and Iran is set to resume in Geneva on Thursday. That's according to Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi, whose country has been mediating between the two sides. He said negotiations are proceeding with what he described as a positive push to go the extra mile towards finalizing a deal. A senior Iranian official says the two sides remain sharply divided, particularly over the scope and sequencing of US sanctions relief. However, the official says Tehran is now offering fresh concessions in an effort to keep diplomacy alive and avert potential military escalation. Iran is reportedly prepared to consider sending part of its most highly enriched uranium abroad, diluting the remainder, and participating in a regional enrichment consortium in exchange for recognition of its right to peaceful nuclear enrichment and the lifting of economic sanctions. Tehran has also signalled openness to allowing US companies to invest in its oil and gas sector as part of a broader economic package. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, suggests Washington is losing patience.
He's I don't want to use the word frustrated. It's almost because he understands he's got plenty of alternatives. But it's curious. He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated. Why under this sort of pressure with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do. And yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place. And yet they've been enriching well beyond the number that you need for civil nuclear. It's up to 60%. They're probably a week away from having industrial grade bomb making material, and that's really dangerous.
The talks come amid heightened tensions as Washington continues to build up military assets in the Middle East while pressing Tehran to curb its nuclear program. Experts say that both sides remain far apart, with key disagreements over sanctions, enrichment rights and regional security issues.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has discussed the latest about upcoming nuclear negotiations with the United States in Geneva during a phone call with the Omani mediator. Meanwhile, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian said the talks had so far yielded encouraging signals. Our Turaj Shiralilo has more from Tehran.
Iran's top diplomat Abbas Araghchi held a telephone contact with Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi late on Sunday after the Omani mediator confirmed that upcoming round of Iran-US nuclear negotiations will be held in Geneva on Thursday. According to the state news agency IRNA, they exchanged views on the latest status of indirect talks between Iran and US, discussing arrangements for holding the third round of the renewed nuclear negotiations. Meantime, President Masoud Pezeshkian said that talks with US have yielded encouraging signals, stressing Iran's readiness for any potential scenario. In a post on X, he said that Iran is committed to peace and stability in the region, continues monitoring US military buildup, and has made all necessary preparations for any potential scenario. Earlier, in an interview with CBS News aired on Sunday, Araghchi said that if US wants to find a solution to Iran's nuclear program, the only way is diplomacy, stressing that military buildup cannot put Iran under pressure. According to the Iranian foreign minister, Tehran and Washington can reach a deal better than the 2015 nuclear agreement, adding that Iran is preparing a draft agreement which he hoped will be ready to be discussed when Iranian and US negotiators meet on Thursday. Araghchi also reiterated that uranium enrichment for peaceful purposes is a matter of pride for Iran and that negotiations with US solely focus on the nuclear issue. Turaj Shiralilo, Tehran, Foreign News.
European Union foreign ministers have met in Brussels amid a dispute over new sanctions on Russia and a planned €90 billion loan to Ukraine. Hungary has said it will block both measures until the flow of Russian oil through the Druzhba pipeline resumes. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said it was unlikely that EU countries would reach an agreement on the 20th package of sanctions against Russia today. Deliveries of Russian oil to Hungary and Slovakia have been cut off since late January, when Kiev said a Russian drone strike hit the pipeline in western Ukraine. Both countries accuse Ukraine of failing to restore the infrastructure. Officials also discussed the Gaza peace process as well as developments in Syria and Venezuela at the Foreign Affairs Council meeting. At least 4 people have been killed and 26 others injured in Russian attacks on Ukraine over the past day. 2 of the deaths were reported in the southern city of Odessa, while the other 2 occurred in Zaporizhia. Authorities said emergency services were on the scene in Odessa, working to extinguish the fire that broke out after a drone crashed into a truck stop. Fresh allegations linked to Jeffrey Epstein have reignited political pressure in Westminster, with a senior Conservative MP raising the prospect of treason and calling for a parliamentary inquiry into potential corruption and foreign influence. Our correspondent in Manchester brings us more.
The UK's former Security Minister Tom Tugendhat has raised the prospect of treason as he called for a special parliamentary committee made up of MPs, peers and retired judges to investigate Epstein-linked allegations involving Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Lord Mandelson. In an interview with the Sun newspaper, he said the body should have powers to summon witnesses and demand documents, to examine allegations of foreign influence and national security risks linked to the Epstein scandal. Tugendhat questioned what the palace and ministers knew and whether Britain's treason laws, written more than 700 years ago, need to be updated. He says Parliament must consider what the scandal means for the country beyond what a court might decide. Under UK law, treason includes plotting the death of the monarch, waging war against the crown or aiding the king's enemies. If proven, it is one of the most serious crimes in British law, historically carrying the death penalty and now punishable by life imprisonment. Both Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Lord Mandelson are under police investigation for alleged misconduct in public office, but both deny any criminal wrongdoing. The former prince was arrested and released under investigation over claims he passed confidential reports while serving as a trade envoy. Mandelson is alleged to have shared market-sensitive information with Epstein while a government minister. If treason were ever proven, it would mean a member of the royal family committed one of the gravest crimes against the crown during the reign of his own mother, Queen Elizabeth II. The last person convicted of treason in the UK was jailed in 2023 over a plot to kill Queen Elizabeth, for which he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Zena Farisada, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
US President Donald Trump has raised a temporary tariff on imports to 15%, just a day after the Supreme Court struck down his previous trade program.
US President Donald Trump has increased a temporary tariff on all US imports from 10 to 15%, the highest level allowed under Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act. The decision came less than 24 hours after the Supreme Court ruled that he had exceeded his authority by imposing sweeping global tariffs under a 1977 Emergency Powers Law. In a 6-3 decision, the justices said the International Emergency Economic Powers Act did not grant the president the powers he claimed. In response, Trump turned to a different and largely untested law that allows tariffs of up to 15% for 150 days, unless Congress votes to extend them. The White House says certain goods, including critical minerals, metals, and energy products, are exempt. The decision has also created confusion over existing trade agreements. US Trade Representative Jameson Greer said countries that negotiated higher tariff deals must honor them. Exports from Malaysia, Cambodia, and Indonesia will continue to face agreed rates of 19%, even though the universal rate is lower.
Nothing changes where they'll be paying tariffs, and we will not be paying tariffs. Our deal with India is they pay tariffs. This is a reversal from what it used to be, as you know.
Earlier, some countries welcomed the court's ruling. French President Emmanuel Macron said it showed the strength of democratic checks and balances.
We shouldn't go too fast either, because I note that President Trump, after a few hours, said he had revised the measures to introduce new tariffs, but this time more limited and for everyone. So we will see. We will look exactly at the consequences, what can be done, and we will adapt.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz warned that continued uncertainty over tariffs is damaging for both Europe and the United States. In London, the government said it expects its privileged trading position to continue, although business leaders warned the higher rate could hurt British firms. And South Korea convened an emergency meeting to assess the impact.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss Trump's tariff hike and its impact on the global economy. Stay tuned.
Well, hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you. world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Welcome back to A News. Our top story for discussion. U.S. President Donald Trump has sharply escalated a brewing global trade dispute, raising his newly introduced worldwide import tariffs from 10% to 15% just days after the Supreme Court ruled that his earlier sweeping tariff regime was unconstitutional. The court said Trump exceeded presidential authority in imposing tariffs without Congress, forcing Washington to rethink its legal basis for trade policy. Allies in Europe are warning the United States to honor existing trade pacts while markets and global businesses continue to react to the sudden policy shift. Economists are also warning that shoppers aren't likely to see price relief anytime soon, despite the court ruling. Now we'll examine what this means for the global economy. Joining us from Washington, D.C. to break down the legal, economic and geopolitical impact of this sweeping tariff escalation is Peter Ruff, senior contributor at Newsweek and expert on U.S. economic policy. Peter, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you. How are you?
Good. So the President Donald Trump increased the global tariff from 10% to 15% almost immediately after the court decision. What message does that send to the business community and to U.S. allies?
Well, it sends a message that tariffs are here to stay, but that shouldn't be a surprise. There's been a lot about the court decision that has been misunderstood, principally that the court did not find tariffs unconstitutional, didn't even find the president's power to impose tariffs unconstitutional, found in a divided group of 6 justices, found that the president didn't have the authority to impose the tariffs he imposed under the law he cited when he imposed them. It's a very narrow ruling, and in fact has nothing to do with, for example, the tariffs imposed on Canada concerning aluminum or lumber products.
Mr. Ruff, how are U.S. companies responding to this sudden policy shift, especially those that depend on imported inputs or global supply chains?
Well, the response has already started, and there's not a shift back. What we're seeing is a withdrawal of U.S. corporate activity overseas and a renewed long-term investment here in the United States, which they believe not only will pay off in economic terms, but will pay off in political terms, meaning that by bringing manufacturing back to the United States, these companies will resist future pressure to act from subsequent administrations and subsequent Congresses.
So will this new tariff regime undermine or complicate existing trade agreements that the United States has negotiated, for example, with the EU or South Korea?
That's what's got to be worked out over the next few days. There are people who are saying, and I think incorrect, that any tariff agreement that resulted from the tariffs that have just been called down by the Supreme Court is invalidated. I don't think that's true. Anything that passed Congress overcomes the objection, the principal objection that the 6 justices seem to agree on, that Congress had to have a voice in the conversation, and on all of those agreements, Congress had a voice in those in what was decided. And so I don't know that the separate trade deals that countries entered to under the pressure of the tariffs that Trump enacted or threatened to enact will at all be effective.
So with more than 130 million US dollars in tariffs collected under the strike down regime, how likely is it that companies will see refunds and over what timeline?
The court offered no guidance whatsoever on that very important part of the conversation. So Trump has collected all of these tariffs in violation of his authority. They've got this large pool of money. Democratic politicians are already arguing that it works out to $1,700 per person. And so the American people ought to get a $1,700 tax rebate. Companies will no doubt argue that if they paid the tariffs, they ought to get the refunds. And there may be people who argue that the tariffs were legal while they were in effect, and so the government gets to keep the money. They just can't continue to collect them. This is something, too, that I suspect is going to be worked out in the courts as a legal matter, but also be fought out in Congress as a political matter. Because the political party that claims they can deliver $2,000 checks to every home in America as a tariff rebate gets a boost going into the November general election.
Mr. Ruff, Goldman Sachs and other analysts suggest tariffs haven't yet led to lower consumer prices even after relief. What sectors in the U.S. economy are most exposed?
Well, I don't know. I predicted that tariffs would lead to prices. I think tariffs, there was broad agreement that tariffs would lead to higher prices, but inflation is down under 2%. That doesn't mean prices have come down. It means the rate the prices are rising has slowed back to where it's for 40 years before the Biden administration. I'm not at all sure that the tariffs have produced a price rise, surprisingly. What I do think they may be doing is inhibiting economic growth. Growth for the fourth quarter was only 1.4%, far less expected, even though there was a much higher expected report. More people workforce joining the force in the private sector, while people were leaving the government workforce, which is a key measure of where the economy is going wise. And so I happen to think, as tariffs or taxes, that the tariffs are retarding growth, and growth could have been stronger. And so I'm disappointed on the impact they're having on growth. I don't think they're having the impact on prices that people expected.
So given that Section 122 has not been used before for broad tariffs, do you expect new legal challenges, and what might those look like?
Oh, absolutely, legal challenges. There will be business interests that will challenge the president's authority to levy tariffs without support of Congress anytime he tries under any section of the law. If those challenges haven't been filed yet, it's only because the lawyers haven't had the chance to get to the courthouse, and they're still waiting for the ink to dry. The business community doesn't want tariffs on them. At least most of them don't want tariffs. And they believe they function best in a free trade, global free trade environment, as I believe they function best in a global free trade environment. And so they will challenge this in court too. Now, these tariffs are different than the earlier tariffs in that there's a 100 or 150 day time frame in which they can remain in place before they have to be removed by law. And I suppose the president is counting on that 100 days to come up with a new rationale for the tariffs that he proclaimed on Liberation Day.
Mr. Ruff, finally, what should global businesses and governments be planning for in the coming month as this legal and trade uncertainty continues?
Well, I think that what they should be planning for is Donald Trump will continue for the rest of his administration to raise the price of doing business in America unless other countries reduce the costs for America to do business there. This tariff war is about leveling the global playing field, about making sure that the barriers of entry into foreign markets and the barriers of entry into U.S. markets match. And the reason for that is Trump believes, and he may be right on this, that the rest of needs to be able to sell in the American marketplace more than America needs to be sold in the global marketplace. Now, that's not true every single, but on balance, that means, and if he's more expensive and says, if you cut your price to entry, we'll cut our price to entry, that's a good deal for everybody, and they should take it.
Peter Roth, thank you very much for your insights and analysis on these complex and fast-moving developments. We appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Iran has agreed a secret $500 million euros arms deal with Russia to acquire thousands of advanced shoulder-fired missiles, according to the Financial Times. The agreement, reportedly signed in Moscow in December, commits Russia to deliver 500 Verba launch units and 2,500 missiles between 2027 and 2029. The deal was negotiated between Russia's state arms exporter and Iran's defense ministry, the newspaper said, citing leaked documents. The report comes amid heightened tensions over Iran's nuclear program, following U.S. strikes last year that Washington said destroyed key facilities, though an initial intelligence assessment suggested the damage only delayed Iran's capabilities by a month. Strains are intensifying between Afghanistan and Pakistan after the recent Pakistani airstrikes, with the Taliban saying civilians were killed. Islamabad insists it targeted militant camps linked to recent suicide attacks in Pakistan. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis reports the latest from Kabul.
Tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan are escalating after Pakistan conducted airstrikes inside Afghan territory. Kabul has reacted sharply. The Ministry of Defense has described the strikes as a blatant violation of Afghanistan's sovereignty and international law, warning that attacks on civilian areas and religious centers will not go unanswered. In a statement, the ministry said a measured response would be delivered at the appropriate time, stressing that the country's territorial integrity is not negotiable. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs summoned Pakistan's ambassador and delivered a formal protest note, calling the strikes a breach of territorial integrity and a provocative act that risks further destabilizing relations. According to local reports, the strike hit Baisud district in Nangarhar early Sunday, killing around 20 members of a single family in Gardi Kach village and injuring several others. A religious seminary in Paktika province was also reportedly targeted. Islamabad accuses Kabul of failing to act against militants from Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan group it says is operating from Afghan soil. It says it has evidence linking recent attacks in Pakistan to leadership figures based across the border. The strikes mark a sharp escalation in tensions just months after the two sides agreed to a fragile ceasefire following deadly border clashes. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Syria has secured a $50 million funding package from the World Bank to upgrade its transport infrastructure as the country continues its economic recovery. The deal was reached during talks in Damascus between Transport Minister and the bank's Middle East Regional Director. The funding will be used to buy 15 locomotives and conduct technical assessments of Syria's railway network for future maintenance and upgrades. Officials also discussed the proposed fast freight transport corridor to improve export routes. Humanitarian assistance continues to move toward Gaza as Turkey dispatches another major aid shipment. The latest delivery comes amid renewed diplomatic efforts and ongoing international talks on the stabilization and reconstruction of the beleaguered coastal enclave.
Over the weekend, the Turkish Red Crescent sent its 21st humanitarian aid shipment bound for Gaza, departing from southern Turkey and heading to Egypt's northeastern city of El Arish. The shipment comes after the partial reopening earlier this month of the Gaza-Egypt Rafah border crossing, which had remained largely closed for the past 2 years. The latest Turkish vessel carried more than 3,000 tons of urgently needed supplies, including food, drinking water, clothing, and materials for building shelters. Upon arrival in El Arish, the aid was received by the Egyptian Red Crescent, which is expected to coordinate the transfer of the supplies into Gaza through the Rafah crossing. The delivery took place as Turkey continues to signal broad support for Gaza's recovery. Last week, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said Ankara was ready to assist in rebuilding Gaza's shattered health and education sectors and help train police forces in the war-torn Palestinian territory. Speaking in Washington at the first meeting of the Board of Peace, chaired by U.S. President Donald Trump, Fidan also said Turkey was ready to contribute troops to a proposed stabilization force for Gaza. The Board of Peace is an international body designed to oversee stabilization and reconstruction efforts in Gaza within a broader peace framework initiated last year. Fidan warned, however, that Gaza's humanitarian situation remains dire and that ceasefire violations have continued, calling for what he described as a prompt and effective international response to the crisis. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
President Ilham Aliyev has received a delegation led by Farzaneh Sadegh, Iran's Minister of Roads and Urban Development and co-chair of the Azerbaijan-Iran Intergovernmental Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation. During the meeting in Baku, both sides recalled Farzaneh Sadegh's visit to Azerbaijan last year and her earlier talks with the head of state. The Azerbaijani president welcomed the expansion of the bilateral agenda, underlining that joint projects between Azerbaijan and Iran would create new opportunities not only for both nations, but for the wider region. Farzaneh Sadegh highlighted the deep historical, religious and cultural ties linking the two countries. The sides also stressed the importance of the upcoming 17th meeting of the State Commission on Economic, Trade and Humanitarian Cooperation to be held in Baku. They also discussed the North-South Transport Corridor, the construction of a highway bridge over the Araz River, connecting the Agband and Gelale areas, as well as other issues of mutual interest. Georgia is once again reinforcing its geopolitical focus on regional connectivity and its role as a key transit hub in the South Caucasus. The latest high-level economic talks in Armenia highlight Tbilisi's strategy to strengthen cooperation with its closest regional partners while supporting peace-building efforts and protecting its position in emerging regional transport routes. Our Nini Nikolashvili has more.
Georgia has been steadily increasing its engagement with Armenia over the past 2 years with frequent high-level visits and growing economic coordination. This reflects Georgia's broader strategy to position itself as a central connector between Europe, Asia and the South Caucasus through the so-called Middle Corridor, a major transit route linking Asian and European markets. This strategic direction was highlighted during the recent visit of Georgia's economy minister, Mariam Kriushvili, to Armenia, where she held talks with Armenia's economy minister, Gevorg Papoyan. The ministers discussed expanding cooperation in transport infrastructure, energy connectivity, and trade, key elements that support Georgia's long-term transit ambitions. The discussions come at an important moment for the region. With ongoing peace efforts between Armenia and Azerbaijan and new regional transport initiatives under consideration, Armenia may gain alternative connectivity routes that could potentially compete with Georgia's traditional transit role. In response, Georgia is actively strengthening its partnership with Armenia to ensure that it remains a critical link in regional logistics and trade networks. A notable step in this direction is Georgia's decision to impose symbolic tariffs on the transit of Azerbaijani oil products to Armenia through its territory. This measure supports Armenia's access to energy supplies while reinforcing Georgia's role as a reliable transit partner. At the same time, it allows Georgia to maintain its economic and strategic relevance in regional transport flows. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
The Khojaly Voices of the Silent Through the Lens of Reza Degati exhibition in Baku recalls the Khojaly tragedy that took place 34 years ago through powerful photographs. The exhibition also highlights the importance of preserving historical memory and conveying the truth of these events to younger generations.
An exhibition dedicated to the victims of the Khojaly tragedy has opened in Baku, bringing together visitors, historians and young people to reflect on events that unfolded 34 years ago in Khojaly.
At the photo exhibition dedicated to Khojaly, the traces of war and human destinies are presented through documentary photographs. The exhibition conveys a message of remembrance and the preservation of historical memory.
The photographs, stark, emotional and unfiltered, were taken by internationally renowned photojournalist Reza Degati shortly after the tragedy. Through his lens, the human consequences of war are laid bare: grief, displacement and shattered communities. Organisers say the exhibition is not only about remembrance, but also about preserving historical memory and informing younger generations through the language of documentary photography.
So I have been under pressure over 34 years because of showing the truth of what I have seen. I have been in 110 countries. I have seen a lot of other stories in the world, but this is the only one that when I'm showing, there's such a pressure over my shoulder and my works, and they tried to destroy a lot of my exhibition. I am voice of the voiceless people. There are a lot of things happening in the world, a lot of nation, a lot of population, which they are under pressure and suffering, and also, let's say, nobody understands what's going on. Or, in the case of the Azerbaijan and Armenia, the narration that is told to the world is the wrong one in the same. So I have been over all my works, in everywhere I have done works, being voice of the voiceless people.
For more than 3 decades, Degati has exhibited photographs related to Khojaly in various countries, including Malaysia, France and the United States, bringing international attention to the tragedy. The exhibition in Baku serves as both a tribute to the victims and a reminder of the importance of documenting history.
Chairman of the People's Council of Turkmenistan, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, says diversifying gas exports remains the country's top priority. Limited pipeline infrastructure continues to restrict exports, with China remaining the main destination for Turkmenistan, which is a holder of the world's 4th largest gas reserves. Berdimuhamedov also invited international companies to participate in the Tapi pipeline project, designed to deliver gas to Afghanistan, Pakistan and India. The first section of the pipeline running to the Afghan city of Herat is scheduled for completion in late 2026. Central Asia is set to experience a sharp rise in population over the next 2 decades. The trend is expected to put growing pressure on infrastructure, water supplies and transport links across the region. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
The population of Central Asia could reach 96 million people by 2040. This forecast comes from the Eurasian Development Bank. According to the bank, rapid population growth has the potential to become a strong economic driver for the region. At the same time, it's putting increasing pressure on infrastructure. Energy systems, transport networks and water resources are already facing growing demand. Without a major push in energy efficiency, modern mobility and water management, sustainable development will be difficult to achieve. Water scarcity is emerging as a structural challenge. Estimates from the Eurasian Development Bank suggest that by 2028, Central Asia could face an annual water deficit of between 5 and 12 cubic kilometers. A significant share of water is lost due to aging infrastructure, and without modernization, these losses are expected to increase. Geography remains another constraint. Central Asia's distance from ocean ports raises the cost of trade by 20 to 40%. The bank describes this as a distance tax, a permanent burden that limits competitiveness and slows economic growth. To address this, the bank points to the need for a network of transport corridors across Eurasia aimed at reducing trade costs. Particular attention is given to north to south routes and the Trans-Afghan corridor, which could provide Central Asia with access to markets in South Asia and the Gulf region. And despite these challenges, Central Asia remains one of the fastest growing regions in Eurasia. According to UNICEF, the region's population surpassed 84 million by 2025. The Eurasian Development Bank expects the combined economies of the 5 Central Asian countries to reach $600 billion by 2026. And experts stress that future progress will depend on how effectively the region responds to 3 closely linked challenges: demographic growth, transport connectivity, and water security. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A-News.
A series of informational sessions has been launched by the WF13 Azerbaijan operating company for journalists who will actively cover the World Urban Forum 13, set to take place in Baku from May 17th to 22nd. The first training session kicked off today, focusing on general information about the forum. Primarily attended by local journalists, the session highlighted current global urbanization challenges and the key objectives of the upcoming forum. Participants were introduced to essential urbanization terminology and thematic priorities relevant to WF13 coverage. International experts joining as speakers also shared their insights and professional experience with the local media.
Preparations for the World Urban Forum are well underway, and the whole of government commitment behind this event signals that WUF 13 is considered potentially as transformational for Azerbaijan as was COP29 in 2024. The declaration of 2026 by President Aliyev as the Year of Urban Planning and Architecture further confirms that sustainable urban development is a strategic national priority, requiring vision and innovative ideas, as well as dialogue and coordinated action amongst institutions and sectors. I sincerely believe that WUF 13, combined with the declaration of 2026 as the Year of Urban Planning and Architecture, places Azerbaijan at a pivotal moment. WUF 13 should not be seen as simply as a conference, but as a window of opportunity, a rare convergence, if you allow me, of political commitment, institutional mobilization, and international visibility.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss Syria's recovery under renewed Islamic State attacks and the growing security reconstruction dilemma. See you shortly. Welcome back to A News. Now we'll look at Syria's fragile path to recovery unfolding against a renewed security threat. The so-called Islamic State has claimed fresh attacks on Syrian army personnel, signaling what it calls a new phase of operations against the leadership of Ahmad al-Sharaa. These incidents come as Damascus simultaneously pushes ahead with reconstruction efforts, including a new $50 million World Bank transport package, highlighting the stark contrast between economic rebuilding and persistent instability. To unpack these developments, the security implications of renewed Islamic State attacks, and what reconstruction financing really means for Syria's future, I'm joined by Hamdi Rifai, Government Relations Executive Director at MOS Strategies and a Foreign Affairs Analyst, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Mr. Rifai, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks a lot. So, Islamic State says these attacks mark a new phase. How serious is this escalation in practical terms?
In practical terms, I think that it actually demonstrates a certain level of desperation, because what's happened is this. We see that they didn't make this statement when Syria joined the coalition to defeat ISIS. They made this statement when they realized how strong the Syrian government is, and they saw that there was a defeat of the Kurdish extremist terrorist group, the SDF-YPG PKK. Many of your viewers will recall that former ISIS fighters had actually had been quote unquote rehabilitated into the SDF, YPG, PKK, and had joined that fighting force, holding the areas east of the Euphrates. Now that they've been defeated and PKK foreign fighters are being sent back to Iraq and other areas, these people are left in a desperate situation how to survive. And that's why you see this recurring effort. It's actually part of that reflection of that a terrorist group was holding the areas east of the Euphrates, not ISIS, but the YPG PKK.
Mr. Rifai, why do areas like Deir al-Zor and Raqqa remain vulnerable to Islamic State activity?
Well, the Syrian government has only taken control of these areas only recently. There's no substantial state presence in these areas. They're now working to establish services, put into place police force units, etc. So, of course, they remain vulnerable. It's only been 10 minutes since the government took control of these areas. I think what you're going to see is that there will be a mix between Syrian state police forces that enter these areas and Arab tribes that remain committed to their interests. And so if that means aligning with a terror group or this group or that group, that still remains viable to them for survival. And so that can give, some power to ISIS in those areas. However, the Syrian state is acting quickly to quell any opportunities.
So how capable are Syrian security forces today compared to previous years?
We've seen that they're a substantial fighting force, or in the words of previous former U.S. President Obama, formidable. Most analysts had said, it's going to be very difficult for the Syrian government to take areas east of the Euphrates from the SDF, and it happened in the snap of a finger, a matter of days. So I think that really demonstrates just how committed, how credible, and how capable they are.
Mr. Rifai, turning to reconstruction, how significant is the World Bank's $50 million package politically and economically?
I don't mean to diminish the value of $50 million, but it really is a mere drop in the bucket. I mean, if you really look at what has happened in Syria, for example, you had these ISIS detainees in El Hol camp that were primarily women and children in substantial numbers that have now been transferred out. That $50 million isn't even going to do anything to support them and to rehabilitate them and bring them back into society. So, $50 million is a start, but it's certainly nothing to be cheering about.
In your view, can infrastructure projects like railway proceed effectively amid ongoing security threats?
Oh, of course. The railway connections that would connect the Gulf areas with Turkey, those are the ones of primary concern, are areas west of the Euphrates that are clearly within government control, other than Sueda and the areas occupied by Israel outside of the Golan Heights. So the railway really shouldn't be too much of a problem in terms of security, and will really open a lot of doors in terms of trade and commerce to reduce the ability of ISIS to get recruits.
And also, what does this funding suggest about international attitudes toward engagement with Damascus?
I think most of the world, I would say the overwhelming majority of the world, are very positive on the outlook for Syria. We've seen a lot of statements about minorities and other things, but this is the only path. And every nation in the world seems to have understood that. There is a new era, a new paradigm of security in the Middle East, and Syria is at the center of that. So most states have embraced the opportunities available in Syria with, some hesitation, just because it is a very unstable situation in some parts of Syria.
Mr. Rifai, looking ahead, what should be the priority? Tightening security first or accelerating economic recovery? Or can be both realistically move together?
They have to realistically move together, because without trade, commerce, economic development, people will continue to be desperate, and that is what feeds the terror narrative that allows them to have recruits. So they have to move together regardless.
So thank you very much for your insights and for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity. God bless Azerbaijan. Have a nice day.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more updates, and thank you for joining us.